Peacekeepers under fire. Gunmen carry out the deadliest single attack on international forces in Western Sudan. The UN says some armed groups have called peacekeepers legitimate targets. So do those charged with protecting others have a strong enough mandate to protect themselves? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Veronica Pedrosa. The UN peacekeeping force in Sudan's Darfur region has suffered its worst ever losses. 7 peacekeepers have been killed and 17 others injured in an ambush near their base. The joint African Union UN force, dubbed UNAMID, has been operating in Darfur since July of 2007. The mission's made up of around 20,000 troops and international police. Its mission is to protect civilians, provide security for humanitarian aid, and promote human rights. Since the mission started, 156 personnel have been killed, including these latest casualties from Tanzania. Questions are now being raised about how safe the peacekeepers are. Nick Toxvig reports.
Peacekeepers on patrol in Darfur earlier this year. Since a joint United Nations and African Union mission in Darfur, known as UNAMID, began 6 years ago, thousands of foreign soldiers have been stationed here with the mandate to protect civilians. But in recent months, they have increasingly become targets themselves. Saturday's incident happened in the southern sector of Darfur. It is thought that troops were transferring from a base near the state capital, Niala, to another base near the town of Khor Achebi, when they were attacked with heavy machine guns and possibly rocket-propelled grenades. Yeah! Since coming to Darfur, more than 40 members of UNAMID have been killed in hostile action. Their response has been to deploy as many as 150 patrols a day, operating around the clock.
The government's effort to impose law and order and control and bring justice and accountability have failed. Under those circumstances, the UN must seriously consider whether there is a role for its peacekeeping forces in Darfur. Because what has happened, in a sense, is in the last few years, the UN peacekeeping force has provided an alibi for the government in Khartoum to continue its ethnic cleansing tactics and basically give a fig leaf to for their efforts.
The past 10 years of conflict in Darfur have forced more than 1 million people from their homes. Just this year, hundreds of thousands have fled the fighting. The UN says that its peacekeeping presence is strong enough to fulfill its protective mandate. But now some rebel groups say they consider foreign troops to be legitimate targets, meaning this worst ever attack on UNAMID may not be an isolated incident. Nick Toxvig, Al Jazeera.
So to our discussion in a moment. First, though, I'm joined from Khartoum by Christopher Sismanik, acting spokesman for UNAMID. It sounds as if it was pretty well planned.
I mean, anytime I think there's an ambush, it is going to be something that's going to be planned. You know, this is something that many times, and regrettably so, most of the attacks that take place are in the form of an ambush. We had something happen only about 10 days ago. Where we had 3 peacekeepers injured, and that was an ambush also.
Well, this is the thing, and the UNAMID troops, this is not the first time this has happened. UNAMID troops often fail to defend themselves despite the mandate providing for them to do that. They're armed, they have ammunition, but there's something wrong, they say, with the way they operate, making them vulnerable to attacks. For example, there's a lengthy bureaucracy for any kind of movement within the operations. Isn't it time to fix that?
Well, I think that's a hypothetical. I mean, in this case and in the case last week, or the case about 10 days ago, our peacekeepers defended themselves. They did fire back. There were injuries sustained on the other side just in the attack that was about 10 days ago. This attack, it has yet to be seen, but we sent reinforcements to that area. But if you are vastly outnumbered, if you have a small patrol and it's vastly outnumbered by many more people with heavy artillery, and in the case of an ambush, you are probably going to sustain casualties. And there's nothing that can be done in terms of an ambush. It makes it very difficult, particularly the terrain that our peacekeepers operate on. In terms of the professionalism, we have troops from many different countries. And there is going to be a certain degree of professionalism from these different countries. But as far as our mandate's concerned, we're going to continue to push forward. We conduct many patrols, about 150 so patrols a day or more. And that's going to continue to happen. But there are going to be setbacks along the way, and this regrettably is one of them.
Well, one thing that could help, of course, is a robust investigation, which has been attempted in previous attacks on UN peacekeepers in Sudan, but never brought to a conclusion.
Well, typically these are, and we've mentioned this many times, typically these are internal investigations that go on. There's speculation in terms of who's involved, and many a times these are internal investigations. When something does come out, it usually comes out in the form of the Secretary General's report. So that's what we'll leave it up to, and hopefully there'll be more information at that time. But you're right, many times it is difficult to catch the perpetrators, and I know we had Undersecretary General for Peacekeeping Operations, Hervé Ledsus, who was here about 10 days ago, and he called for the perpetrators of the last ambush that they be brought to justice. And of course, we rely on the government to assist us with this. And
but the fact
as well
is
as the
that
movements
government
that might know
allied forces have actually intercepted investigative convoys, missions that have been trying to get to the bottom of who's behind the attacks.
Well, actually, we've had cases, and this has been a continual problem, more or less in terms of not being able to access areas where there was fighting going on, where civilians were possibly at risk. But in terms of our investigation, this area we did receive access to. The last incident happened about 10 days ago. We had immediate access to. So I would debate that question. That's simply not true. All
right, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you, Christopher Sismanik. On to our guests now then. From Nouakchott in Mauritania, Ahmedou Ould-Abdallah, a diplomat and former UN Special Representative for West Africa. In our London studios, Ishaq Meki is chairman of the Darfur Victims Organization of Relief and Rehabilitation. And here in Doha, Salah Eddin El Zain, director of the Al Jazeera Center for Studies and a Sudanese scholar from Darfur. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. I'd like to begin by asking Ambassador Ould-Abdallah, you were involved in the negotiations that went into forming the UNAMID mission and mandate. What did you think when you heard this news about peacekeepers being killed?
Thank you. Yeah, in December 2006, I was sent jointly by then Secretary General Kofi Annan and the present Secretary General Ban Ki-moon for a mission to meet President al-Bashir. And to be back to what is happening today, I'm saddened because the UN, even under Chapter 7, is there to help stability and peace. They never attack first. And I feel very sad that they are taken as a victim or scapegoat for belligerent who have their own problem.
Do you think that's to do with the mandate?
Really, well, the mandate is Chapter 7, but very often, because basically UN peacekeeper would like to help, they are taken as a target, a cheap target, which is unacceptable. And Ban Ki-moon was absolutely right in condemning the aggression, which is unfortunately not the first one, because we already lost 150 peacekeepers in Sudan over the last 6-7 years.
Ishaq Meki in London, you represent victims in Darfur. It seems that the peacekeepers, though, are becoming victims themselves. What can you say if you were to assess what the peacekeepers have done so far?
Well, it is very sad that we've seen the peacekeepers has been attacked and they become victim. But the fundamental question is always remain how much they have done since they deployed in Darfur, and how many people have they protected since. It is the fundamental question remain that the mandate that they have is not good enough to protect civilians in the first place. And they themselves now vulnerable, as we can see, and the people of Darfur, including the rebel groups and the Janjaweed and all of these armed people are targeting them because I think their position is not quite neutral, and they're so close to the government. They sometimes, people say, acting as an alibi, because this is why they have been targeted and they're vulnerable now. What I believe that they're sent there to protect the civilians.
Yeah, I want to take that question to Doha and Salah Eddin El Zain. Why is the UN so closely identified with the government? Is it fair?
Well, I think that perception has been growing, since the establishment of the UNAMID, and it was largely seen that the UNAMID leadership has been closely working with the government, and this perception has been growing. And I think a lot of have been said about this, and there is an element of truth to it.
Can you go into more detail?
Yes, I think the one aspect, as I mentioned, the leadership of the UNAMID has been closely associated with the government, and the UNAMID has been unable to respond to some of the violations, especially with regard to what happened in the IDP camps, and sometimes also complaints by the rebel groups about the violations of the government.
But just a minute, there have been previous attacks on the UN peacekeeping forces, because there are, after all, 3 of them in the Greater Sudan region,
yes,
that have been blamed on the government. So what are people saying, that they're being attacked by the government at the same time as, or government forces, the SAF, as they say, at the same time as being closely identified with Khartoum?
Well, I think this allegation has been there, but no action has been taken from the UNAMID side against these allegations. And I think the general perception is there. Unless it is proven otherwise, it will remain that the UNAMID is being seen as very closely associated with the government.
Ambassador Ahmadou Ould-Abdallah, you know, I'm sure that you have a lot to say in response to that, but can I ask you to begin by just talking about the approach that the UN has taken with UNAMID, which is about kind of regional conflict management, rather than actually keeping the peace?
Yeah, no, this is a very good question. You know, we have a problem, and I don't understand the confusion between the relationship between a UN representative or UN Security Council and a member state. To be clear, Sudan, Khartoum in particular, is still member of a United Nations Assembly and member of United Nations. So it is absolutely normal that its UN representative have relationship with the government. This does not mean, should not mean, cannot mean that they are close to the government or acting on behalf of the government. Secretary General and Hervé Latsous, you know, Secretary General in charge of peacekeeping, are very clear on this. And my own experience, we are not close to government. We work with government because they are member of the organization. We need to work with them the same way we need to work with rebel and so on. There is a neutrality, and perception should not lead to attacking people who are there to help. You know, they have not shot on rebels, they don't do, and very often UN peacekeepers are seen as sitting ducks, and that is unacceptable.
It's not in their mandate to stop any ongoing firefight. It's never really prevented any bloodshed or killing of civilians. Surely that indicates that something is wrong with the mandate too, though, doesn't it?
Well, the mandate is to maintain peace and stability. And it, of course, and your question is very fundamental. It is easier to maintain peace, to have peacekeeper, when the two parties are member state, when you have two countries. Unfortunately, in a civil war, this is where we have a confusion. You know, the gentleman from Doha, I understand him, that a representative meets the government and it is on TV, it is carried out, whereas the rebels are not met in the same manner. And this is the problem with UN trying to maintain peace, stability in a civil conflict. It is more equipped to do it between two states in conflict. However, I am convinced that UN peacekeeper in Darfur are neutral, the soldier as well as the staff.
Ishaq Mekki?
Yes, I think it's important again that the UN UNAMID forces are there in Darfur by a mission, and that mission and the treatment of that mission has to come from New York, not from the Sudan government. Even though Sudan government is a member of the United Nations, I think their mandate has to be separate and independent, and they have to receive the orders and work from New York. Therefore, we see that if the missions of the UNAMID forces in Darfur, if they go to conflict places, they have to take one member from the Sudan government within them. So and that is the person it's meant to be reporting back to the Sudan government, and that's where the rebel groups always seen that the UNAMID forces are a spy on them, and that is why people think that since these forces came into Darfur, they never actually prevent any attacks on civilians. The camps around Niala and Al-Fashir has been removed by the government. There's nothing has been said by the UNAMID forces. In Labado and Muhajiria, recently the government attacked them. There's nothing stopped them to do that.
Let me ask you.
We want to see stopping of this. Stopping.
Right.
We are therefore want this to be stopped.
Let me ask you about the potential humanitarian implications if UN peacekeepers are being seen as legitimate targets.
Well, I don't actually support this idea, and I don't think the rebel groups are really meaning to attack them, because the rebel groups have previously attacked I think they are involved in
wait a minute, they used rocket-propelled grenades just earlier on today, and said, you know, this was a very deliberate and well-planned attack, it looks like.
Well, what I'm saying here is I don't believe that the rebel groups will attack the UNAMID forces, because they are already taken to The Hague and the trial is underway. And in having seen that by their own eyes, I don't think they will ever think about coming to attack the UNAMID forces. But I think also
who do you think is responsible then?
Well, I don't. I'm not too sure for this. But recently, last week, the government and I mean the security force of Sudan and the Janjaweed have a huge dispute, and the government have shot the leader of the Janjaweed, Mr. Ali Kosheb, who is wanted by the International Criminal Court, and now they are trying to implicate Sudan government and embarrass Sudan government by attacking the UNAMID forces. That's what I assume has happened. But we wait to hear from the UNAMID forces themselves, because they have got all the means and equipped and the helicopters to see who attacked them in the first place.
Let me ask you, Dr. El-Zain here in Doha, this is a conflict that is probably best understood as being conducted on several levels at once. Given that, who do you think is responsible for the rising violence that we've seen this year, and indeed specifically for the attack on the UN peacekeepers? We
all understand this is a very tricky situation, because the government on one side is the government of the country, it is a legitimate government, but on the other side it is a part of the conflict. And many incidences were where it was the government was accused, but the UN was very reluctant to react. Sometimes bombings of villages, sometimes attacks and violations within refugee camps and IDP camps. Because of all these incidences, that perception is still there. But let me come to your question. This security situation in Darfur is very complex. We have the government there, we have the rebel groups and different factions of rebel groups, we have the remnants of the Janjaweed, we have some criminal groups, and outside the bigger cities, I think it is very difficult difficult to talk about maintaining law and order. So nobody knows who these groups are, and sometimes criminal groups can commit these acts, and they get away with it because the situation is really out of control in most parts of Darfur. And I'm from there. I know for a fact that some of the areas mentioned here, it is rarely under the control of the government or the UNAMID troops there. One last point, I just want to highlight that the mandate of the UNAMID involves that maintaining law and order, also securing humanitarian assistance. And I think in terms of humanitarian assistance, the UNAMID might have achieved some success relatively better than the other elements in terms of promoting human rights or promoting law and order. That is completely a failure, I think, in the last few years when the UNAMID came to Darfur.
Let me just at this point remind viewers that the United Nations actually has conducted 68 peacekeeping missions around the world since 1948, drawing on troops from more than 100 countries. The UN's currently involved in 15 separate operations. 8 of those are in Africa, including Sudan, of course, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the latest mission in Mali. There have also been peacekeepers in India and Pakistan since 1949, Cyprus since 1964, Lebanon since 1978, Kosovo since 1999, and Haiti since 2004. More than 111,000 military and civilian personnel are deployed in these countries, and more than 3,000 have lost their lives. The missions are also taking a heavy financial toll. The UN says approved resources for the year to June were $7.3 billion, $1.4 billion of which is budgeted for UNAMID, for the operations in Sudan. Ambassador Ahmadou Ould-Abdallah, we were talking just a little earlier with Dr. Elzine about this kind of fragmentation that's going on in Sudan, and you were talking about how difficult it is for the UN to kind of grapple with these multiple non-state actors in conflicts. Can you tell us how that might affect a mission like the one in Mali?
Thank you. Thank you. You know, from what your guests have said and on Darfur and saying that they don't know who did this assassination, and I call it assassination of Peacekeeper, it is also very interesting to know that the whole Sahel, including Western Sudan, Darfur, is in trouble. Not only Mali, not only Southwest Libya. So personally, I think it will be very important that the rebel groups, the government, make their own inquiry, and the UN indeed, to see who is behind this assassination. But at the same time, we should look also into these groups who have been defeated in Mali, and I hope they have no connection with what is going on in Western Sudan as a whole, because the whole Sahel is in trouble with movement of armed rebel group, traffickant, moving across the border and helping each other or getting trouble to draw attention away from their leaders who are hidden somewhere in this vast space of African Sahel.
All right, we only have time for a final word now from Ishaq Meki in London. I just want to ask you, from the perspective of victims, in just 1 minute, should UNAMID stay?
Well, what we want as a victim in Darfur and Sudan, actually we need a lasting peace for Darfur, and the Sudan government should really engage in negotiation with all parties to bring about peace and stability, because this will lead to bring in Al-Qaeda, bring in people from Mali to operate in this area, which is lawless. But nevertheless, I would say the UNAMID forces should stay, because they need to report at least the incidents that are occurring from the government or from the role or from any other groups. So, but we need really to have the right mandate and to do the right thing in Darfur, not to stay there and to just monitoring what is happening.
All right, thank you very much indeed to all my guests. We're out of time. We could have gone on speaking, of course. Thanks very much indeed, Ambassador Ahmedou Ould-Abdallah, Ishaq Meki and Salah Eddin El Zain. Don't forget, you can find this show and many more at aljazeera.com. Just follow the link for the shows, and also at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And why not leave us your comments there too. Thank you for watching. From me, Veronica Pedrosa. Goodbye for now.